Welcome, weary traveler. Allow your thoughts to settle, your breath to deepen, and your mind to drift back to a time profoundly different from our own. A time when the very essence of sweetness, a taste we now take for granted, was a rare and precious gift, diligently sought and fiercely guarded. This was the world of the Middle Ages, a vast span of history stretching across 1,000 years, from the twilight of the Roman Empire to the dawn of the Renaissance. And in this expansive, often harsh landscape, one golden liquid reigned supreme as the undisputed king of all sweet things: honey. Imagine, if you will, a culinary landscape devoid of the granulated white crystals that fill our modern pantries. There were no sugarcane fields stretching across vast continents, no immense refineries churning out refined sucrose by the ton. The concept of sugar as we understand it simply did not exist for the vast majority of people. For the vast majority of time, across the breadth of medieval Europe, this absence of sugar-shaped diets defined luxuries and influenced trade routes in ways that are almost unfathomable to our contemporary, sugar-saturated palates. Our senses, finely tuned by centuries of sugar consumption, would be profoundly shocked by the typical medieval diet. The sweetness we crave, the immediate burst of intense sucrose that tantalizes our taste buds, was an experience almost entirely unknown. Instead, medieval palates were accustomed to more subtle, earthy flavors. Grains, vegetables, pulses, and occasionally meat formed the bedrock of their meals. When a dish called for sweetness, it was not merely to add a sugary punch, but to temper other flavors, to enrich the overall profile, or to serve a specific medicinal purpose. The few alternatives to honey that existed were limited, regional, and far less potent. Fruits, of course, offered a natural sweetness. Apples, pears, berries, plums, and grapes were enjoyed when in season. But these were ephemeral pleasures, tied to the fleeting cycle of nature. Dried fruits, such as figs and dates, imported from warmer climes, provided a more concentrated sweetness, but remained expensive and less common. Root vegetables like parsnips and carrots, if harvested after a frost, could offer a hint of sweetness, but nothing comparable to the intensity of honey. Tree saps, like that from the maple, were known in some northern regions, but their production was localized and nowhere near as widespread or efficient as honey gathering. The world, in essence, was a much less saccharine place. This fundamental difference in diet profoundly impacted medieval culture. Sweetness became synonymous with celebration, with luxury, and with special occasions. To offer a guest a dish sweetened with honey was a mark of honor and hospitality. To indulge in a honey-laced pastry was an act of joyful extravagance. It was not merely a flavor, it was a symbol, a testament to care, skill, and often, wealth. The psychology of sweetness was thus inextricably linked to preciousness. A medieval person would experience sweetness as something earned, something savored, something truly special, unlike the casual, often unconscious, consumption of sugar that defines much of modern eating. Honey, therefore, was not merely a sweetener, it was the sweetener. It was the taste of the sun captured in liquid form, the essence of countless blossoms distilled by the tireless work of tiny winged creatures. It was a primary ingredient in nearly every medieval kitchen, from the grandest castle to the humblest cottage, from the simplest loaf of bread to the most elaborate feast dish. Honey played a role in seasoning, preserving, and, most importantly, providing that coveted sweet note. It was found in thick, warming porridges that started the day, offering comfort and energy. It was mixed into baked goods, various cakes, tarts, and spiced breads which, though different from modern confectionery, nonetheless provided a delightful indulgence. Medieval recipes often call for honey, not just for taste, but for its unique properties. Its natural humectant quality, for example, helped keep baked goods moist, extending their freshness in an era without refrigeration. Its inherent acidity could balance the richness of other ingredients, and its complex flavor profile added depth that modern sugar, with its singular sweetness, often lacks. Beyond solid foods, honey was indispensable in beverages. It was used to sweeten simple water, making it more palatable. It was added to small beer, a low-alcohol brew consumed daily by many, to enhance its flavor. And, perhaps most famously, honey was the sole and essential ingredient for mead, the ancient fermented honey wine that was a staple drink throughout many parts of Europe, particularly in the northern regions where grapes for viticulture were scarce or non-existent. This potent, sweet, and often spiced drink was a centerpiece of celebrations, a symbol of camaraderie, and a source of warmth on long, cold nights. Mead was not merely a drink, it was an institution, deeply woven into the social fabric and folklore of the age. Its very existence was predicated on the availability and abundance of honey. The medieval palate, therefore, was not simply without sugar. It was defined by honey. The sweetness was richer, more nuanced, often imbued with the subtle floral notes of the original nectar. It was a flavor that lingered, that told a story of flowers and bees, of seasons and sun. It was a natural sweetness, unrefined and wholesome, valued not just for its taste, but for the inherent purity and life-giving essence it was perceived to possess. This perception of purity and natural goodness extended to the very creatures that produced it, the bees. To the medieval mind, the bee was no mere insect. It was a creature of profound wonder, often imbued with almost sacred characteristics. Across diverse cultures and beliefs within medieval Europe, bees were admired, respected, and even revered. They were seen as miniature marvels of creation, embodying virtues that humans themselves strived for. Their tireless work ethic, their communal living, and the immaculate cleanliness of their hives were observed with awe and held up as examples. The bee was a powerful symbol. Its industry, the ceaseless buzzing and collecting of nectar and pollen, became an emblem of diligent labor and perseverance. Monastic orders, dedicated to lives of hard work and devotion, often adopted the bee as a symbol of their own commitment to service. The orderly structure of the hive, with its single queen and countless worker bees, was seen as a perfect, hierarchical society, a miniature kingdom reflecting the ideal social order that medieval thinkers aspired to. This analogy was often used to teach about good governance and the importance of each individual's role within the larger community. Beyond industry, bees were associated with purity and chastity. Medieval naturalists, lacking a complete understanding of bee biology, often believed that bees reproduced without sexual contact, a misconception that elevated their status to a symbol of virginity. This made them especially significant in Christian theology, where the virgin birth of Christ and the purity of the Virgin Mary were central tenets. The wax produced by these chaste creatures was, therefore, considered especially pure and suitable for the candles used in sacred church rituals. A beeswax candle, burning brightly and cleanly, was a potent symbol of divine light and purity. Indeed, the very sound of a buzzing bee was often heard as a gentle, harmonious hum, a natural melody in God's creation. They were creatures deeply integrated into folklore and superstition. It was believed that bees were sensitive to human morality, thriving in virtuous homes and abandoning those where sin resided. Losing a colony was seen as a grave omen, perhaps indicating displeasure from divine powers or a misfortune about to befall the household. Therefore, when a beekeeper lost a hive, it was not merely an economic loss. It carried a weight of spiritual concern. To the medieval peasant, the sight of bees busily flitting among wildflowers in a sun-drenched meadow was a comforting sign of abundance, a promise of future sweetness and light. To the scholar, examining ancient texts, the bee was a subject of philosophical contemplation, its tiny existence a reflection of grand universal truths. To the monk, toiling in the monastery garden, the bee was a quiet companion, a living example of disciplined dedication. This deep reverence for the bee meant that the act of beekeeping, of tending these wondrous creatures, was often viewed with a respectful seriousness, transcending mere agriculture. The beekeeper, therefore, was no ordinary laborer. He was an apiarist, or a melarius in Latin, a guardian of these sacred creatures and a harvester of their sweet gold. His was a life intimately connected to the cycles of nature, a patient dance between human intervention and the natural rhythms of the colony. He needed a profound understanding of the bees' behavior, their needs, and their responses to the changing seasons. His knowledge was often passed down through generations, a blend of practical experience, folklore, and quiet observation. His year was dictated by the bees' year. In the colder months, his concern was the survival of the colonies, ensuring they had enough stores to endure the lean times. With the first signs of spring, his focus shifted to their growth and health, preparing for the expansion of the colony. And in the abundant warmth of summer and early autumn, he looked towards the harvest, the culmination of months of patient guardianship. This rhythmic existence, tied to the sun, the flowers, and the buzzing lives within the hives, made the beekeeper a vital figure in any medieval community. The types of homes provided for the bees varied, but all were designed with simplicity and functionality in mind. The most iconic and widespread was the skep, a dome-shaped basket expertly woven from straw or wicker. These traditional hives were masterpieces of rustic engineering, light enough to be moved, yet robust enough to protect the delicate comb and the thousands of bees within. The outside of the skep was often plastered with a mixture of clay, cow dung, and sometimes ashes, forming a natural, breathable, yet waterproof coating. This protective layer shielded the colony from rain, wind, and the chill of winter, ensuring the bees' survival. Skeps were typically placed on low stands or in small, sheltered apiaries, often facing south or southeast, to catch the morning sun and protect them from prevailing winds. In heavily forested regions, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, beekeepers often utilized hollowed-out logs or even naturally occurring hollow trees in what were known as bee forests or bee gardens. These ancient practices involved identifying a wild colony in a tree cavity, then either protecting that tree and establishing a clear entrance for the bees, or, more laboriously, felling the tree, cutting out the section containing the nest, and moving it to a more accessible location near the homestead. These log hives, or tree hives, provided a robust and natural shelter, reflecting a deep respect for the bees' natural instincts and preferences. Regardless of the hive type, the beekeeper's responsibility was always the same: to provide a secure, comfortable home for his precious charges, allowing them to do what they did best: transform nectar into sweet gold. The economic importance of honey in the Middle Ages cannot be overstated. It was not merely a food item. It was a valuable commodity, a form of currency, and a significant measure of wealth. In a world with a limited monetary system, where barter and payments in kind were common, honey held its own alongside grain, livestock, and cloth as a tradable asset. It was a tangible, desirable product that could be stored, transported, and exchanged for other goods and services. Lords and monarchs often received part of their rents and taxes in honey. A charter from the 12th century might specify that a tenant owe a certain number of bushels of grain, a certain number of chickens, and a specific quantity of honey. This placed honey on par with other fundamental staples, demonstrating its integral role in the medieval economy. For a peasant, a successful honey harvest could mean the difference between mere subsistence and a slight improvement in living conditions, allowing them to trade surplus honey for tools, clothing, or other necessities. For a monastery or a large estate, a thriving apiary contributed significantly to their economic self-sufficiency and their ability to engage in trade. The demand for honey was constant and widespread. It was not just local demand that drove its value. Honey was traded across regions, with specialized honeys from certain areas gaining reputations for their particular flavor or consistency. Its natural preservative qualities also made it an excellent product for long-distance trade, as it would not spoil easily, unlike fresh produce. This stability further enhanced its value as a reliable commodity. Consider its price in relative terms. In England, around the mid-14th century, a gallon of honey might cost around 7 pence. To provide context, this was roughly equivalent to the price of a gallon of butter, which was also a common and important foodstuff. This comparison is telling. Butter, derived from abundant livestock, was a fundamental part of the diet. Honey, requiring the specific, gentle labor of bees and careful human intervention, commanded a similar price, indicating its high value and widespread acceptance as an essential good, not just an exotic luxury. The fact that it was sold by the gallon, a substantial volume, further underscores its common use and the scale of its production. It was not a few spoonfuls for a special treat. It was a bulk item, purchased and consumed regularly. The value of honey also stemmed from its versatility. It was a caloric powerhouse, providing vital energy in an age of hard labor and often meager rations. For travelers, soldiers, and laborers, honey offered a concentrated source of sustenance. It was a natural energy booster, easily digestible, and often consumed directly for a quick burst of vitality. In an age before processed energy bars or sugary drinks, honey was the original fuel. Its dense caloric content made it a highly efficient food source, especially critical during periods of famine or scarcity. But honey's role extended far beyond mere sustenance and economic exchange. It was a cornerstone of medieval medicine, a trusted remedy passed down through generations. Long before the pioneering work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch in the 19th century elucidated the existence of microorganisms, people intuitively understood that honey possessed remarkable healing properties. Its use as a medicinal agent dates back to ancient civilizations. The Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all recognized its therapeutic value. This ancient wisdom was faithfully carried forward into the Middle Ages, where honey became an indispensable part of the physician's toolkit and the layperson's home remedies. The empirical observations of medieval healers, based on centuries of practical application, revealed that honey had a unique power to soothe, to clean, and to heal. It was a natural antiseptic, capable of inhibiting the growth of bacteria. In an era where even a minor cut could turn fatal due to infection, this property was nothing short of miraculous. Wounds, both large and small, were routinely dressed with honey. Knights returning from the brutal chaos of battle, their bodies often riddled with gashes and punctures, would have their wounds cleaned and then packed with bandages soaked in honey. The sticky, viscous liquid would create a protective barrier, preventing external pathogens from entering, while its intrinsic antimicrobial compounds worked to kill existing bacteria. Consider the medical practices during major conflicts, like the 100 Years' War, at battles such as Agincourt in 1415, where thousands of men suffered horrific injuries. Field surgeons worked under dire conditions with limited resources. After a preliminary cleaning of a wound, often with wine or vinegar due to their acidic and mildly antiseptic properties, honey would frequently be applied. This combination represented the cutting edge of medieval wound care, harnessing the power of alcohol and acid to sanitize, and honey to protect and promote healing. Its ability to draw moisture from bacteria, effectively dehydrating and killing them, was a profound advantage in a time without antibiotics. Beyond external wounds, honey was a favored remedy for a host of internal ailments. It was widely used to soothe sore throats, calm persistent coughs, and alleviate the discomfort of chest infections. A warm drink of honey dissolved in water, perhaps with some added herbs, was a common prescription for respiratory troubles. Its demulcent properties, meaning its ability to form a soothing, protective film over mucous membranes, provided immediate relief to irritated tissues. For digestive complaints, such as stomach upset or dysentery, honey was also employed, believed to help regulate the bowels and provide gentle nourishment. Medieval medical theories, often rooted in the ancient Greek concept of the four humors blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, also incorporated honey. It was considered a warm and dry substance, and its therapeutic use would be prescribed based on its ability to balance perceived humoral imbalances within the body. Its inherent purity, deriving from the chaste bee, further enhanced its medicinal reputation, linking its physical efficacy to its perceived moral and spiritual cleanliness. Even the humble cough drop can trace its lineage back to medieval preparations of honey and herbs. Infusions of various plants known for their medicinal properties, such as thyme, sage, or licorice would be mixed with honey, creating a potent and palatable syrup that was both soothing and therapeutic. The sweetness of the honey also served a practical purpose. It masked the often bitter taste of medicinal herbs, making remedies more acceptable, especially to children. Honey, in the Middle Ages, was thus far more than just a culinary ingredient. It was a trusted healer, a precious commodity, a sacred symbol, and the very definition of sweetness. It profoundly shaped the diet, economy, and culture of a world that functioned without the pervasive presence of sugar. To understand medieval life is to understand the paramount importance of honey. This sweet gold, painstakingly gathered by industrious bees and cherished by humanity for its unparalleled versatility and goodness. We invite you to continue this journey with us, to delve deeper into the intricate world of medieval beekeeping, to explore the sacred rituals surrounding the hive, and to uncover the stories of those who dedicated their lives to tending these remarkable creatures. As we move forward, we will peel back the layers of time, revealing a world where the hum of the bee was a promise of light, of life, and of a sweetness that truly defined an age. Join us as we explore the deeper nuances of this lost world, where every drop of honey carried the weight of history and the echo of a forgotten reverence. We return now to the heart of our story, to the very nexus where humanity and nature met in a delicate, buzzing partnership. We turn our attention not just to the golden prize of honey, but to the intricate relationship between its two protagonists, the keeper and the kept. This is the story of the medieval beekeeper, a figure of profound patience and unique skill, and of the bee colony, a society both wondrous and mysterious to the medieval mind. It is a chronicle of their shared existence, a life lived in rhythm with the sun and the seasons, a testament to a bond that sustained and enriched the world for 1,000 years. To understand the world of medieval beekeeping is to first understand the identity of the beekeeper. This was not a single, monolithic role, but a spectrum of individuals. Their status and methods shaped by the landscape they inhabited and the social structures that governed their lives. From the secluded cloisters of a monastery to the wild heart of a primeval forest, the medieval apiarist was a figure of quiet importance, a guardian of a resource that was both life-giving and sacred. Let us first consider the monastic beekeeper, perhaps the most sophisticated and scholarly of his kind. Within the stone walls of the monastery, beekeeping was elevated from a mere agricultural pursuit to a form of devout practice. The monk, or lay brother, assigned to the abbey's apiary, was a man of contemplation and patience. His work was methodical, often informed by the classical texts of authors like Virgil, Pliny, and Columella, which were painstakingly preserved and copied in the monastic scriptorium. These ancient writings, though filled with inaccuracies by modern standards, provided a framework of knowledge that was far beyond the reach of the average peasant. The monastic beekeeper's apiary was a model of order and purpose. It was typically situated in a sheltered part of the monastery grounds, often within the kitchen garden, or a specially designated herb garden, known as a herbularius. This location was deliberate, providing the bees with immediate access to a rich and varied source of nectar and pollen from the culinary and medicinal herbs cultivated by the monks. The air in such a garden would have been thick with the scent of thyme, lavender, sage, and hyssop, and the constant, gentle hum of the bees would have served as a living soundtrack to the monk's daily labors. The motivations of the monastic beekeeper were twofold, reflecting the dual nature of monastic life itself, the spiritual and the practical. Spiritually, the bee was a creature of immense significance. As we have touched upon, the hive was seen as a perfect Christian community, a mirror of the monastery. The tireless, selfless work of the bees, their perceived chastity, and their devotion to their single ruler, the queen, often mistaken for a king, were held up as models of piety and obedience. Tending to these creatures was a form of prayer, a way of engaging with God's creation in its purest form. The gentle hum of the hive was a choir of nature, a daily reminder of divine order and industry. Practically, the monastery's needs were immense. Honey was required in vast quantities for the kitchen, to sweeten the simple fare of the monks, and to offer hospitality to the travelers and pilgrims who sought shelter within their walls. Mead was brewed, not only for consumption, but also as a valuable commodity for trade. But even more critical than honey was the demand for beeswax. The church was the single largest consumer of beeswax in the medieval world. The divine light that illuminated the dark, cavernous interiors of abbeys and cathedrals had to be pure. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, were smoky, foul-smelling, and considered too base for the sacred rituals of the Mass. Beeswax candles, by contrast, burned with a clean, bright flame and released a subtle, sweet fragrance. They were the physical embodiment of the light of Christ, and their purity was a direct reflection of the purity of the bees that produced the wax. The monastic beekeeper was, therefore, not just a provider of sweetener, he was a custodian of sacred light, his work essential to the very practice of his faith. Now, let us move from the cloister to the manor and consider the manorial beekeeper. This individual was a vital part of the feudal economy, responsible for the hives belonging to the lord of the manor. He might be a serf, bound to the land, his labor a form of rent, or he could be a freeman, a cottager with a specialized skill that afforded him a slightly higher status within the village hierarchy. His role was defined by obligation. A significant portion, if not all, of the honey and wax he harvested was destined for the Lord's larder and treasury. His knowledge was not derived from classical texts but from tradition, a deep well of practical wisdom passed from father to son, from master to apprentice. This was an oral tradition, rich with folklore, superstition, and an intimate hands-on understanding of the local environment. He knew the land like the back of his hand. He knew which meadows yielded the sweetest clover honey, which heathlands produced the dark, strong heather honey, and which trees in the Lord's woods were most likely to house a wild swarm. His craft was less a science and more an intuitive art. The manorial beekeeper's apiary might be a small, fenced-off enclosure near the manor house, or it could consist of several smaller apiaries scattered across the estate to take advantage of different types of forage. He would often be responsible for a significant number of hives, and his success directly impacted the wealth and comfort of the manor. A good honey harvest meant the lord could entertain lavishly, that his food could be preserved, and that his household would have ample mead for the winter. A poor harvest had tangible consequences. For this beekeeper, the work was a constant balance between the needs of the bees and the demands of his lord. He was a steward, managing a valuable resource that was, in the eyes of the law, not his own. Finally, we must venture into the wilder parts of the medieval landscape, into the vast, ancient forests that still covered much of Europe. Here we find a different kind of beekeeper, a figure of rugged independence and ancient tradition. The forest beekeeper, known in the Germanic lands as a Zeidler. The practice of Zeidlerei, or tree beekeeping, was distinct from the hive-based beekeeping of the monasteries and manors. It was a form of semi-wild apiculture, where bees were kept in artificially created cavities within living trees. The Zeidler was a master of forestry and a skilled climber. He did not own the bees in the same way a manorial keeper owned his skips. Instead, he owned the rights to use certain trees for beekeeping within a specific tract of forest. These rights were often ancient, hereditary, and jealously guarded, granting the Zeidler a special legal status. He was a free man, often belonging to a powerful guild that protected his privileges and regulated his craft. His work was arduous and dangerous, using specialized tools, including axes and unique climbing gear made of ropes and wooden seats. The Zeidler would ascend massive old-growth trees, often oaks or pines. High above the forest floor, he would carve a tall, narrow cavity into the trunk, known as a bee log. He would then close the opening with a wooden door, leaving a small entrance hole for the bees. The next step was to lure a wild swarm to this new home, a process that involved using special baits and sometimes even capturing a swarm elsewhere and introducing it to the prepared cavity. The Zeidler's relationship with the forest was symbiotic. He was not just a taker, he was a cultivator. He understood the complex ecosystem of the woods, the flowering cycles of the linden and fir trees, and the movements of the wild creatures that shared his domain. His life was one of solitude and self-reliance, his skills honed by a direct and often unforgiving relationship with nature. The honey he harvested, dark and richly flavored from the forest blossoms, was highly prized and formed the basis of a lucrative trade, particularly in the production of gingerbread and other spiced honey cakes for which cities like Nuremberg became famous. The Zeidler represents the oldest tradition of beekeeping, a bridge to a time when the line between the wild and the domestic was far more blurred. Regardless of their social standing, all these keepers shared a common set of profound, practical knowledge. A crucial aspect of this was the art of siting an apiary. The placement of the hives was not a matter of convenience, but a complex calculation of environmental factors, a decision that could determine the success or failure of the entire enterprise. The ideal location was a place of balance and shelter. It needed to be shielded from the prevailing winds, especially the cold, damp winds from the north and east, which could chill the hives and make it difficult for the bees to fly. A south or southeastern aspect was highly favored, as it allowed the hives to catch the gentle morning sun. This early warmth would rouse the bees and encourage them to begin their foraging flights as early as possible, maximizing the productive hours of the day. Access to water was another critical consideration. Bees require water not only for drinking but also for regulating the temperature and humidity within the hive. An apiary situated too far from a reliable water source, a stream, a pond, or even a marshy area would force the bees to expend precious energy on long flights for water instead of foraging for nectar. The ideal water source was one with shallow edges or floating vegetation, allowing the bees to land and drink safely without the risk of drowning. Proximity to good forage was, of course, paramount. A successful beekeeper was also a skilled amateur botanist. He knew the calendar of the land, the sequence of blooms that would provide a continuous flow of nectar and pollen from the first thaw of spring to the last warm days of autumn. He watched for the flowering of the willows and dandelions in early spring, which provided the crucial first nourishment for the colony as it began to build its strength. He cherished the blossoms of fruit trees in his orchard, apple, pear, cherry, and plum, which produced a light, fragrant honey. He valued the fields of clover and vetch, the wild herbs of the meadows like thyme and marjoram, and in some regions, the vast expanses of heather on the moors, which yielded a dark, intensely flavored, and highly prized honey. An apiary was not an isolated unit but the central hub of a vast, invisible network of foraging routes, and the keeper's job was to place that hub in the most strategic location possible. Finally, the keeper had to consider the threat of predators and pests. Mice were a constant menace, often seeking the warmth and food of the hive in winter, where they could chew through comb and destroy a dormant colony. Badgers and bears, where they still roamed, were powerful marauders capable of destroying an entire apiary in a single night, driven by their insatiable craving for honey and bee larvae. Even smaller creatures, like certain species of birds and wasps, could pose a threat. A good apiary was therefore often enclosed by a wattle fence or a thick hedge, and hives were placed on raised platforms or stones to deter ground-based pests. The medieval beekeeper was a strategist, constantly weighing the delicate balance of sun, wind, water, food, and safety. The physical home provided for the bees, the hive itself, was a product of locally available materials and centuries of tradition. As we have seen, the most common and recognizable form was the straw skep. The construction of a skep was a craft in its own right. It began with the gathering of long, clean straw, typically from wheat or rye, which was then bundled and coiled. The coils were stitched together using a binding material, often strips of dried bramble or split willow, which were both pliable and incredibly tough. Using a sharpened bone or wooden tool as a needle, the skep maker would meticulously weave the binding material through the straw coils, pulling each stitch tight to create a dense, rigid structure. The final form was an iconic dome or bell shape, a design that was both structurally sound and naturally adept at shedding rain. A small entrance hole would be cut near the base, and sometimes two smaller holes, or lugs, would be fashioned near the top to allow for the insertion of sticks. These sticks, known as spiles, provided an internal scaffolding, helping to support the heavy weight of the honeycomb as the colony built it out. Without this support, the delicate wax structures could collapse under their own weight, especially on a hot day. Once the basic structure was complete, many beekeepers would plume the outside of the skep with a plaster made from a mixture of cow dung, clay, and sand or ash. This may sound crude to modern ears, but it was a brilliant and effective technology. The mixture dried into a hard, durable shell that provided excellent insulation against both the heat of summer and the cold of winter. It also made the skep waterproof, protecting the straw from rot and the colony within from dampness, one of the greatest threats to their winter survival. The finished skep was a marvel of sustainable, biodegradable engineering, a perfect marriage of natural materials and human ingenuity. In forested areas, the log hive, sometimes called a gum or pot, was a common alternative. This was typically a section of a hollow tree trunk, sawed to a manageable length, and stood on one end. A flat stone or wooden board would serve as a lid. These hives had the advantage of thick, insulating walls, offering superior protection from extreme temperatures. They were heavy and immobile, but they closely mimicked the natural nesting cavities that bees favor in the wild, making them highly attractive to swarms. To protect these precious hives, especially the relatively fragile skepes, a special architectural feature known as a bee bowl was often incorporated into the walls of manor houses, monasteries, and garden enclosures. Bee bowls were a series of arched niches or recesses built directly into a stone or brick wall. Each niche was designed to house a single skep, providing it with complete protection from wind and rain. A wall of bee bowls, facing south to catch the sun, was the medieval equivalent of a luxury apiary, a permanent and secure home for the treasured colonies. These structures, many of which survive to this day, are a solid, tangible reminder of the immense value placed on bees and the lengths to which people would go to protect them. The relationship between the keeper and the kept was not purely practical. It was steeped in a rich tapestry of folklore, faith, and superstition. This was a world where the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thin, and the bee, with its mysterious and seemingly miraculous abilities, was often seen as a creature that straddled both realms. It was a messenger, a symbol, and an active participant in the life of the human family it lived alongside. One of the most widespread and deeply felt traditions was the practice of telling the bees. This was the custom of formally informing the bees in the apiary of any significant events in the beekeeper's household, particularly births, marriages, and, most importantly, deaths. It was believed that the bees were part of the extended family, and to neglect to inform them of such a major life change was to show a grave disrespect that could have dire consequences. If there was a death in the family, the beekeeper, or a close relative, would go out to the hives, knock gently on each one to get the bees' attention, and then softly whisper the news of the passing. The hives would often be draped with a small piece of black cloth, and a share of the funeral food and drink would be offered to them. This act was more than mere sentimentality. It was rooted in a profound belief that if the bees were not properly mourned with, they would either fly away, stop producing honey, or even die themselves. The health of the colony was seen as being mystically tied to the emotional and social well-being of their human keepers. Similarly, at a wedding, the hives might be decorated with ribbons, and a piece of the wedding cake would be left for them, so that they might share in the family's joy. These rituals underscore a worldview in which the natural world was not a separate, inert entity to be exploited, but a living, feeling community of which humans were only one part. The bees were neighbors, partners, and confidants, their gentle hum a constant presence in the daily drama of human life. This sacred bond was further reinforced by Christian faith. Saint Ambrose of Milan, a 4th century bishop, was revered as the patron saint of beekeepers. The legend of his infancy, in which a swarm of bees settled on his face without harming him, leaving a drop of honey on his lips, was a powerful story that connected bees with eloquence and divine favor. Beekeepers would pray to Saint Ambrose for the health of their colonies and for a bountiful harvest. Many of the tools and practices of beekeeping were imbued with a sense of Christian ritual. The use of smoke to calm the bees, for instance, was often done with a censer-like pot, reminiscent of the incense used in church services, further blurring the line between agricultural labor and religious rite. The life of the apiary, and thus the life of the beekeeper, was governed by the unyielding rhythm of the seasons. It was a great, repeating cycle of birth, growth, harvest, and rest, and the keeper's tasks were dictated by the bee's response to the changing light and temperature. A year in the life of the apiary was a masterclass in observation, patience, and timely intervention. The year began with a tentative promise of spring. After the long, cold confinement of winter, the first mild sunny day would trigger a momentous event, the cleansing flight. The bees would pour out of the hive in a joyous, buzzing throng, their first flight in months, to relieve themselves of waste. For the beekeeper, this was a moment of profound relief and hope. It was the first sign that the colony had survived the winter. He would watch these flights intently, judging the strength and health of the colony by the number of bees taken to the air. Following this, the queen, the heart of the colony, would resume her prodigious egg-laying, and the hive would enter a period of rapid expansion. The beekeeper's primary role in spring was one of a supportive guardian. He would ensure the hives were clean and in good repair. If a colony seemed weak or low on stores, he might provide supplementary food, perhaps a small cake of honey from the previous year's harvest. His most important task was observation. He watched the bees returning to the hive, their legs laden with the bright yellow and orange pollen from the first spring flowers, willow, crocus, hazel, and dandelion. This influx of pollen, the bees' source of protein, was the fuel for raising a new generation of workers. The spring was a time of delicate balance. A sudden late frost could kill the early blossoms, leading to a period of starvation within the hive. The beekeeper had to be vigilant, ready to intervene, but careful not to disturb the colony's natural buildup. As spring warmed into summer, the apiary entered its time of greatest abundance. This was the period of the main nectar flow, when the fields and meadows were awash with a riot of flowers, clover, sainfoin, meadowsweet, and countless others. The colony would reach the peak of its population, with tens of thousands of worker bees toiling from dawn until dusk. The sound of the apiary in midsummer was a deafening, energetic roar, the air thick with the comings and goings of the foragers. The beekeeper would add extra skeps or supers if his hive design allowed, providing more space for the bees to store the vast quantities of incoming nectar. This period of explosive growth led to the most dramatic and crucial event of the beekeeper's year, the swarm. Swarming is the natural method of reproduction for a honeybee colony. When a hive becomes too crowded, the bees will begin to raise a new queen. Shortly before the new queen emerges, the old queen, along with roughly half of the worker bees, will gorge themselves on honey and then pour out of the hive in a single, massive, swirling cloud. This living tornado of bees, with the queen at its center, would then settle on a nearby tree branch or other object, forming a dense, pulsating cluster, while scout bees searched for a suitable new home. For the beekeeper, a swarm was both a risk and an opportunity. A lost swarm represented a significant loss of his workforce and a drastic reduction in the honey crop from the parent hive. Capturing the swarm, however, meant a new colony and a potential increase in his apiary. The keeper was therefore on high alert during the swarming season, typically late spring and early summer. He watched for the signs: a crowded hive, a change in the sound of the colony, the presence of queen cells. The act of capturing a swarm was a high-stakes drama. When the swarm emerged, the entire household might be called upon to help. The beekeeper would employ a technique known as tanging, which involved banging on pots, pans, or bells. The medieval belief was that the loud, discordant noise would confuse the bees and cause them to settle more quickly. While the scientific basis for this is dubious, the practical effect was to create an auditory beacon, allowing the keeper to track the swarm's movement and alert his neighbors that he was claiming ownership of it. Once the swarm had clustered, the delicate work of hiving it began. The keeper, with remarkable courage and gentleness, would approach the cluster. He might try to position an empty, prepared skep directly underneath the cluster and then give the branch a sharp jolt, causing the entire mass of bees to fall into their new home. Or, if the cluster was in an awkward position, he might gently brush the bees into the skep with a feather or a leafy branch. The key was to ensure the queen was safely inside the new hive. Once she was in, the rest of the bees would follow her scent, marching into their new home in an orderly procession. Capturing a swarm was a triumphant moment, a skillful and brave act that affirmed the beekeeper's mastery of his craft. As the long, hot days of summer gave way to the cooler, golden light of autumn, the apiary entered its final phase of production. The nectar flow would slow, and the bees would begin to make their final preparations for the winter. For the beekeeper, this was the time of reckoning, the time of the honey harvest. This was the moment his year-long efforts were rewarded, but it was also a time of difficult, sometimes brutal, decisions. The beekeeper would assess his colonies, lifting each hive to judge its weight. The heaviest hives, full of honey, were selected for the harvest. The lighter hives, and those with the strongest, healthiest colonies, would be designated for overwintering. The harvest itself was a smoky, sticky, and dangerous business. The keeper would use smoke from a smoldering pot of dried herbs, rotten wood, or cow dung to subdue the bees. The smoke, triggering the bees' instinct to prepare for a forest fire, would cause them to gorge on honey, making them docile and less inclined to sting. With the traditional straw skep, the harvest was often a terminal event for the colony. Because the comb was attached directly to the walls of the skep, there was no way to remove the honey without destroying the hive's internal structure. The most common method, therefore, was to place the selected skep over a pit of burning sulfur. The toxic fumes would quickly and quietly kill the entire colony, allowing the beekeeper to access the honeycomb without the danger of a single sting. It was a grim and pragmatic solution, a stark reflection of the unsentimental realities of medieval life. The strongest colonies were preserved to ensure the continuation of the apiary, while the weaker or surplus ones were sacrificed for their precious stores. The processing of the honey and wax followed. The honeycomb would be cut from the skep, crushed by hand, or with a simple press, and then strained through a linen cloth to separate the pure liquid honey from the wax and other debris. The remaining wax would be washed, melted down, and purified, ready to be made into the priceless candles that would light the darkness of the coming winter. Finally, winter would descend upon the land, bringing a period of quiet and dormancy to the apiary. The surviving colonies would form a tight cluster deep within the hive, surrounding their queen. By shivering their flight muscles, they would generate heat, maintaining a core temperature that would allow them to survive even the most bitter cold. Their only food was the honey they had so tirelessly gathered during the summer. The beekeeper's work was not over, but it changed in nature. He would ensure the hives were protected from the worst of the winter storms, perhaps moving them into a shed or ensuring their entrances were clear of snow. His main task during this quiet season was to prepare for the year to come. He would mend his tools, weave new skeps from the summer's straw, and process the last of the beeswax. It was a time for reflection, for planning, and for waiting. He would listen at the side of the hive on a quiet day for the faint, reassuring hum from within. a sign that life still persisted in the cold darkness. His year, and the year of his bees, had come full circle. It was a cycle of profound intimacy, a partnership built on a deep understanding of the natural world. The keeper tended to the kept, and in return, the kept provided the sweetness and light that made human life not just possible, but richer, sweeter, and more sacred. This intricate dance between the human and the insect, played out over centuries, laid the foundations of our modern understanding of apiculture. The knowledge, the reverence, and the deep connection to nature that defined the medieval beekeeper are a legacy worth remembering and, perhaps, emulating. In our fast-paced, disconnected world, there is much to learn from the patient, observant life of the keeper and the industrious, communal life of the kept. We encourage you to reflect on this forgotten relationship. The next time you see a honeybee visiting a flower in your garden, or the next time you taste the complex, floral sweetness of real honey, take a moment to remember this long history. Consider supporting your local beekeepers, who are the modern inheritors of this ancient craft. Plant pollinator-friendly flowers to help sustain the bees that are so vital to our own food supply. By taking these small steps, you can become part of this timeless story, helping to ensure that the gentle hum of the bee, which provided so much for the medieval world, will continue to grace our world for generations to come. Join us, in your own way, in becoming a keeper of this precious legacy. We have walked with the beekeeper through the hopeful dawn of spring and the abundant roar of summer. We have witnessed the miracle of the swarm and the patient guardianship of the keeper. Now, we arrive at the culmination of it all. We arrive at the season of reckoning, a time of profound significance when the year's labor, both human and hymenopteran, is finally weighed, measured, and brought to fruition. This is the story of the harvest, a process steeped in tradition, fraught with risk, and rich with the promise of sweetness and light for the dark months to come. This is the harvest of gold. The end of summer in the medieval world was not a sudden event, but a slow, graceful exhalation. It was a sensory transformation, a gradual shift in the very character of the land, and the beekeeper, a man whose life was a study in natural signs, was its most attentive student. The harvest did not begin on a specific date marked on a calendar, for the medieval calendar was a living document, written in the language of the sun, the soil, and the sky. The harvest began when the world declared itself ready, and the keeper's first and most crucial task was to learn to read these subtle, yet unmistakable, declarations. He would feel it first in the air. The oppressive, heavy heat of high summer would break, replaced by a new crispness in the mornings, a coolness that clung to the hollows and lingered in the long shadows cast by the rising sun. The quality of the light itself would change, shifting from a brilliant, bleaching white to a softer, more golden hue that seemed to infuse the very landscape with a sense of gentle melancholy and ripe fulfillment. The sky would appear a deeper, more resonant blue, and the sunsets would burn with a fiery intensity, painting the clouds in shades of orange, rose, and violet. He would see it in the fields surrounding his homestead or the manor. The vibrant greens of summer would begin to fade, replaced by the tawny gold of ripe wheat, the pale yellow of barley, and the dusty brown of fallow earth. The rhythmic swish of the scythe and the communal songs of the reapers would echo across the landscape, a human chorus accompanying nature's seasonal shift. The beekeeper knew that as the great agricultural harvest of grain reached its peak, the great nectar harvest of the bees was drawing to its close. The two were inextricably linked, twin rhythms in the great annual cycle of sustenance. He would read the signs in the flora that sustained his colonies. The vast, vibrant carpets of clover and sainfoin that had painted the summer meadows would wither, their blossoms turning to brown seed heads. The wild herbs that had perfumed the air would begin to go to seed. The season of extravagant abundance was over. Now, only the hardiest of autumn flowers remained. On the moors and heathlands, the heather would be in its final, glorious flush of purple, offering a last, precious nectar flow that would produce a dark, thick, and intensely flavored honey, a regional treasure. In the woodlands and along the hedgerows, the ivy would begin to bloom, its small, unassuming greenish-yellow flowers providing a final, vital source of pollen and nectar before the coming of the frost. The beekeeper would observe his bees foraging on these last resources, their movements seemingly more urgent, more deliberate, as if they too sensed the closing of the window of opportunity. This deep, intuitive understanding of the landscape was the foundation upon which all his subsequent decisions were built. But to truly know when the moment of harvest had arrived, he had to move from the general to the specific. He had to learn to read the hive itself, to interpret the subtle language of the colony, and discern its state of readiness. This was not a single observation, but a series of them, a gathering of evidence that would culminate in a final, fateful judgment. His observations would begin at a respectful distance. He would watch the entrance of the hives, the bustling epicenter of the colony's world. In the height of summer, this entrance was a scene of chaotic, unceasing activity, a blur of bees coming and going. Now, in the autumn, the pace would have changed. The frantic energy would have subsided, replaced by a more measured, purposeful industry. The flights of the foragers would be less frequent, their departures and arrivals more synchronized with the warmest parts of the day. He would notice a change in the hive's population. In late summer, he might have witnessed the grim but necessary expulsion of the drones. The male bees, having served their single purpose of mating with a queen, were now a drain on the colony's resources. As the nectar flow dwindled, the female worker bees, in an act of ruthless pragmatism, would systematically drive the larger defenseless drones from the hive, leaving them to perish in the cooling air. The sight of this drone cull was a sad but definitive sign that the colony was shifting from a mode of expansion to one of consolidation and survival. The time of plenty was officially over. The beekeeper would also observe a change in the colony's temperament. The bees would become more defensive, more techy, as the old keepers would say. The guard bees at the entrance would be more numerous and more aggressive, quick to challenge any intruder, including the keeper himself. This heightened defensiveness was a natural response to the season. The hive was now filled with its winter stores, a precious treasure of honey that represented the colony's only hope of survival. The bees were instinctively programmed to protect this treasure at all costs from robbers, be they wasps, mice, or meddling humans. The keeper understood this and respected it, seeing it not as an act of aggression against him personally, but as a testament to the colony's success. Their fierceness was a measure of their wealth. The sounds of the apiary would also shift. The deafening, high-pitched roar of a colony at the peak of the nectar flow would mellow into a lower, more contented hum. On a still, warm afternoon, the keeper would press his ear to the side of a hive and listen. The sound from within was the collective voice of the colony, and a skilled keeper could interpret its nuances. A strong, steady, resonant hum spoke of a populous and healthy colony, contentedly curing the last of the honey and preparing for the winter cluster. A weak, high-pitched, or erratic sound could signal a problem, a failing queen, disease, or a lack of stores. All these external signs were crucial pieces of the puzzle, but the ultimate decision rested on a far more direct and physical assessment. It rested on the act of hefting, the simple yet profoundly skillful practice of lifting a hive to judge its weight. This was the moment of truth, the final weighing of the season's success. Hefting was an art form, a physical knowledge stored not in books, but in the muscles and sinews of the beekeeper's arms and back. He would approach the hive with a slow, deliberate calm, his movements fluid and unthreatening. He would place his feet squarely, finding his balance on the uneven ground. Then, placing his hands on either side of the skep or log hive, he would crouch and lift, not with a sudden jerk, but with a steady, controlled pressure. He was not trying to lift the hive clear off its stand, but merely to feel its resistance, to gauge its inertia, to sense the density of the treasure packed within. In his mind, he held a memory of what that same hive had felt like in the spring, when it was light and nearly empty, a hollow basket of straw and bees. He compared that memory to the present reality, a hive that felt almost bolted to the ground, that resisted his pull with a deep, satisfying gravity, was a successful hive. This was a colony that had worked tirelessly and effectively, filling every available space with the heavy, golden weight of honey. A hive that lifted easily, that felt light and hollow, was a cause for concern. This was a colony that had struggled, perhaps due to a weak queen, disease, or a poor location, and had failed to gather sufficient stores to survive the winter, let alone provide a surplus for the keeper. Hefting was an act of profound judgment. With each lift, the beekeeper was passing sentence on a colony. This one, heavy and prosperous, would be marked for the harvest. Its life, its collective effort, would be sacrificed for the good of the human household. Another, also heavy, but with a colony he knew to be particularly strong and vigorous, might be marked for He would leave its treasure untouched, knowing it was the best hope for the continuation of his apiary in the coming year. and a third, pitifully light, would be condemned by its own failure. It had little chance of surviving the winter on its own, and the keeper might choose to harvest what little it had, or perhaps unite its bees with a stronger colony. The beekeeper, in these moments, was a figure of consequence, his decisions a matter of life and death, his judgment guided by a deep and unsentimental pragmatism forged by the realities of medieval survival. Once these judgments were made, the keeper would turn his attention to his tools. The harvest required a specialized arsenal, a collection of simple yet highly effective instruments, each one honed by generations of use. This was the arsenal of the apiarist, and at its heart was the one tool that made the entire enterprise possible: the smoker. The medieval smoker was not the sophisticated bellows-driven device of the modern beekeeper, but it operated on the same principle. It could be a simple, long-handled metal pan or a perforated clay pot, known as a cresset. The keeper would fill this pot with his chosen fuel, ignite it, and then carry it by its handle, swinging it gently to encourage the smoke to billow out. For more directed puffs of smoke, a primitive bellows, made from wood and leather, might be attached, though this was a more advanced and less common piece of equipment. Often, the smoker was as simple as a tightly rolled bundle of smoldering rags or a piece of slow-burning, decayed wood. The fuel for the smoke was a matter of both practical science and folk wisdom. The ideal fuel was one that produced a cool, dense, and plentiful smoke without bursting into open flame. The most common and highly prized fuel was dried cow dung. This might seem unpleasant to the modern sensibility, but it was a perfect material. It was readily available. It smoldered for a very long time, and it produced a cool, thick smoke that was highly effective at pacifying the bees. Another favored fuel was touchwood or punk, the dry, spongy wood from the inside of a decaying tree, often colonized by fungi. This material would burn slowly and consistently, like a natural incense stick. Dried puffball mushrooms were also used, as were bundles of certain dried herbs. The choice of fuel was part of the beekeeper's traditional knowledge. The smoke it produced had a distinct aroma, a unique perfume of the harvest, a scent that was a mixture of earth, fire, and the sweet promise of honey. Next came the matter of personal protection. The medieval beekeeper had no access to the full, zippered bee suits that make modern beekeeping a relatively sting-free activity. His protection was rudimentary, a testament to his courage and his high tolerance for pain. His primary defense was his clothing. He would wear his thickest woolen tunic and breeches, the dense felted fibers of the wool offering a surprising degree of protection against bee stingers. He might wear a pair of thick leather gloves or gauntlets, similar to those used for hedging or falconry, though many keepers preferred to work with bare hands, believing it gave them a better, more sensitive feel for the delicate work. The most critical piece of protection was for the face and neck. A simple veil, often made from a finely woven horsehair mesh or a piece of dark-colored linen, would be draped over a wide-brimmed hat. The dark color was important, as it was easier to see through than a light-colored fabric. This simple veil was his only shield against the wrath of thousands of agitated bees. Despite these precautions, stings were an unavoidable and accepted part of the job. Every beekeeper had his own folk remedies for the pain and swelling ear: poultice of mud and spit, the application of crushed dock leaves, or simply a stoic endurance. The accumulated stings of a lifetime often led to a degree of immunity, but the initial pain was a constant and respected danger. Finally, the keeper would gather the tools of extraction. A long, thin-bladed knife, made of iron or sometimes even sharpened bone, was needed to cut the comb from the hive. A large goose feather or a soft, leafy branch would be used to gently brush the bees from the surfaces of the comb. A collection of wooden buckets, barrels, and large earthenware pots would be assembled to receive the heavy, dripping combs, and bolts of clean linen cloth, carefully stored for this purpose, would be readied for the final, crucial process of straining. With his judgments made and his tools prepared, the beekeeper was ready. All that remained was to choose the perfect moment to begin. The chosen hour for the harvest was as carefully considered as the location of the apiary. The ideal time was late in the afternoon or in the early evening, on a clear, calm, and relatively cool day. There were several reasons for this. By late afternoon, most of the foraging bees would have returned to the hive, meaning the entire population would be present and could be dealt with at once. A calm day, with little wind, was essential for controlling the smoke and preventing the bees from becoming agitated and difficult to manage. A cooler temperature also helped to keep the bees' temperament subdued. Attempting a harvest in the middle of a hot, humid day was a recipe for disaster, as the bees would be at their most active and aggressive. The beekeeper was a master of timing, and he would wait with the patience of a hunter for the precise convergence of conditions that would give him the greatest advantage. As the appointed hour approached, a solemn quiet would often fall over the beekeeper. This was the beginning of the ritual, and his own state of mind was a critical component. He knew that bees were sensitive to agitation, to quick, jerky movements, and panicked energy. He would consciously calm himself, his breathing becoming slow and regular. His movements would become deliberate, graceful, and efficient, honed by years of practice. He would approach the apiary not as a conqueror, but as a reluctant but necessary agent of fate. The ritual began with the lighting of the smoker. He would carefully ignite his chosen fuel, blowing gently until it was smoldering perfectly, producing a steady stream of thick, white smoke. Then, with the smoker in one hand and his tools at the ready, he would approach the first hive, marked for harvest. He would administer the first few gentle puffs of smoke at the entrance. The reaction from the hive was immediate and dramatic. The contented hum would instantly change to a loud, angry roar, the sound of thousands of bees raising the alarm. The keeper would wait patiently, giving the smoke time to work its magic. The smoke served two purposes. First, it masked the alarm pheromones that guard bees release when they are threatened. These pheromones, which smell faintly of bananas, are a chemical signal that incites the rest of the colony to attack. By overwhelming these signals with a dense smoke, the keeper could prevent a mass, coordinated defensive response. Second, and more importantly, the smoke triggered a primeval survival instinct in the bees. The smell of smoke signaled a forest fire, the greatest natural threat to their existence. Their immediate response was not to fight, but to save their precious resources. They would dive into the honey cells and begin to gorge themselves, cramming their honey stomachs with as much honey as they could hold in preparation for abandoning the hive. A bee with a full stomach is physically less able to curl its abdomen to sting, and its primary instinct shifts from defense to self-preservation. The angry roar from within the hive would slowly subside, replaced by a subdued, almost drunken hum. The colony was now pacified, its collective mind distracted, and its defenses compromised. Now came the most difficult and somber part of the entire process, the act that separated the gentle art of beekeeping from the grim reality of the harvest. For the keeper using traditional skeps, the most efficient and common method of harvesting the honey was to kill the entire colony. To do so, he would turn to the sulfur pit. Earlier, he would have dug a small pit in the ground, a few feet away from the apiary. Inside this pit, he would place a small pile of sulfur, a yellow brimstone mineral that was widely available. As dusk began to fall, he would ignite the sulfur. It would burn not with a bright flame, but with a low, eerie blue light, releasing thick, acrid fumes of sulfur dioxide. The keeper, his face covered with a cloth to protect him from the choking gas, would then lift the condemned skep from its stand. He would hold it for a moment, feeling the weight and the vibration of the thousands of lives within. Then, in a single, swift movement, he would invert the skep and place it directly over the smoldering pit. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The heavy sulfur fumes would rise and fill the cavity of the skep, and the life within would be extinguished in a matter of moments. The subdued hum would cease abruptly, replaced by a profound and heavy silence. It was a silent, efficient, and, in the eyes of the medieval keeper, a necessary act of destruction. The colony that had toiled all summer long, that had filled the air with its energy and life, was now gone. The keeper would feel a pang of regret, a sense of loss for the beautiful and industrious creatures he had tended. But this feeling was quickly superseded by the pressing needs of survival. His family needed the honey for food, the wax for light, and the surplus for trade. Sentimentality was a luxury he could not afford. Not all beekeepers resorted to the sulfur pit. A less common but more humane method was known as driving. This involved placing the full skep upside down and then placing an empty skep over the top, rim to rim. The keeper would then drum rhythmically on the sides of the full skep. The bees, instinctively wanting to move upwards and away from the disturbance, would slowly march out of their home and into the empty skep above. This method saved the bees, who could then be united with another colony, but it was far more time-consuming, more difficult, and carried a much higher risk of stings. For most, especially those managing a large number of hives, The grim efficiency of the sulfur pit was the method of choice. With the colony subdued or deceased, the work of unveiling the treasure could begin. The keeper would carry the heavy, silent skep to his processing area shed, a barn, or a dedicated honey house. The first task was to break the seal. The bees, master architects, used a sticky, resinous substance called propolis, gathered from tree buds, to seal every crack and crevice in their hive, making it weatherproof and secure. The keeper would use his knife to cut through this seal, the sound of the propolis cracking and snapping in the quiet of the evening. As he lifted the skep from its stand, the first wave of aroma would wash over him, an intoxicating perfume that was the very essence of summer. It was an overwhelmingly rich and complex scent, a heady mixture of warm beeswax, sweet honey, and the faint, floral ghosts of 1,000 different blossoms. It was the smell of success, the smell of abundance. Inside, he was greeted by a sight of breathtaking beauty and order. A perfect, golden city of wax, built in the darkness, now revealed to the light. The combs, delicate curtains of hexagonal cells, hung in parallel ranks, a masterpiece of natural engineering. He would marvel at the perfection of the structure, the absolute precision of the hexagons, a shape that the bees had instinctively mastered to store the maximum amount of honey with the minimum amount of wax. He would observe the different colors and textures within the comb, a visible record of the season's foraging. There would be the pale, almost translucent honey from the early spring fruit blossoms, the rich amber honey from the summer clover fields, and perhaps darker, thicker veins of honey from late-season sources like heather or ivy. Some cells might still contain bee bread, a fermented mixture of pollen and nectar that served as the colony's protein source. Its vibrant orange and yellow hues a stark contrast to the golden honey, and over the cells filled with cured honey, the bees would have placed a pristine, white capping of pure beeswax, a perfect seal that indicated the honey was ripe and ready. Now, the messy, sticky work of extraction began. With his long knife, the keeper would carefully cut the combs from the interior of the skep, or from the wooden bars of a more advanced hive. The heavy combs, dripping with honey, would be placed in a large wooden bucket or earthenware pot. The feel of a full comb was one of surprising weight and fragility. The warm, sticky honey would coat his hands, the taste of it on his fingers a first, immediate reward for his labor. Once all the comb was harvested, he would move to the next stage, the sweet alchemy of processing. The goal was to separate the two precious commodities, the liquid honey and the solid beeswax. The most common method was simple and effective. The entire mass of honeycomb, wax, honey, and all would be crushed. This could be done by hand, kneading and squeezing the comb, or with a simple wooden mallet or press. This broke open all the wax cells, releasing the honey trapped within. The result was a sticky, fragrant mash. This mash was then scooped into a large conical bag, typically made of sturdy, clean linen or horsehair. The bag was then hung from a beam over a large pot, and then the keeper had only to wait. Under the gentle, relentless pressure of gravity, the pure, liquid honey would begin to seep through the fibers of the cloth, dripping slowly, steadily, into the waiting receptacle below. Drip, drip. Each golden drop was a note in the slow, quiet symphony of the harvest. The honey that came from this first, gentle straining was the finest quality, known as virgin honey, or life honey. It was pale, clear, and possessed the most delicate flavor. This was the honey that would be reserved for the lord of the manor's table, for medicinal use, or for the most special of occasions. After the dripping slowed, the keeper would press or wring the bag to extract the remaining honey. This second pressing would yield a darker, more strongly flavored honey, still excellent for general cooking, baking, and for brewing mead. Nothing was left to chance, nothing was wasted, but the harvest was not yet over. Left inside the straining bag was a damp, sticky mass of beeswax, pollen, and other debris. This was the second part of the golden treasure. This mass would be washed in a large cauldron of hot water. The pure beeswax would melt and rise to the surface, while the heavier impurities would sink to the bottom. The keeper would carefully skim the liquid wax from the surface of the water and pour it into molds to cool and harden into clean, transportable blocks. This purified beeswax was, in many cases, even more valuable than the honey itself. It was the raw material for the smokeless, sweet-smelling candles that would light the churches, monasteries, and wealthy homes, a source of pure light in a dark world. Finally, the honey, now strained and pure, would be poured into its storage vessels. These were typically large earthenware jars or pots, which would be sealed with a wooden lid, a piece of waxed cloth tied down with twine, or a plug of clay. These pots would be carried down into the cool, dark cellar or larder, and placed on stone shelves alongside the other preserved foods of the harvest, the salted meats, the pickled vegetables, the barrels of ale. To see the larder shelves lined with pot after pot of glistening golden honey was to see a tangible manifestation of wealth, security, and well-being. It was a promise of sweetness in the long, cold winter to come. It was the taste of sunlight, stored in clay, ready to be released. The harvest of gold was more than just an agricultural process. It was a ritual of transformation. It transformed the ephemeral beauty of a million summer flowers into a stable, enduring source of nourishment. It transformed the ceaseless labor of a living colony into a tradable commodity and a source of sacred light. And it transformed the beekeeper, for a season, into an arbiter of life and death, a master of ancient rituals, and the sole purveyor of the sweet gold that enriched and defined a taste of his world. This intimate, profound, and often brutal connection to the source of our food is something we have largely lost in the modern era. We find our honey in plastic bottles on supermarket shelves, divorced from the seasons, the bees, and the keepers who tend them. We invite you to reconnect with this ancient story. Seek out a local beekeeper, taste the honey from your own region, and notice how it captures the unique flavor of the local landscape. Understand that when you choose raw, local honey, you are not just buying a sweetener, you are supporting a timeless craft. You are participating in a story that stretches back for millennia, and you are tasting the true, unadulterated gold of the harvest. By valuing the source of this sweetness, you help preserve the legacy of the keeper and the future of the kept, ensuring that this golden treasure will continue to enrich our world for generations to come. We have spoken of sweetness and of the keepers who guarded its source. We have followed the cycle of the seasons as reflected in the life of the hive, and we have witnessed the solemn, smoky ritual of the harvest. Now, we turn our attention to the final, glorious transformation of that harvested gold. We turn to the alchemical process that converted the food of bees into the drink of heroes, the inspiration of poets, and the very lifeblood of community. This is the story of a liquid legend, a beverage born from the union of honey, water, and time. This is the story of Mead, the drink of gods and men, before the first grape was ever crushed for wine in the sun-drenched hills of the south, before the first field of barley was cultivated for beer under the grey skies of the north. There was Mead. It is a drink of primordial origin, an ancestral memory flowing in liquid form. Its creation requires no agriculture, no tilling of the soil, no complex cultivation. It asks only for the wild sweetness of honey, the life-giving purity of water, and the patient, mysterious work of fermentation. It is, perhaps, the oldest alcoholic beverage ever conceived by humanity, a spontaneous gift born from a chance encounter between a broken honeycomb, washed by rain, and the invisible, ever-present magic of wild yeast. This ancient lineage imbues Mead with a character wholly distinct from its more common counterparts. Wine is the blood of the earth, a product of the tamed and cultivated vine. Beer is liquid bread, the nourishing issue of the harvested field. But Mead is the essence of the wild, a distillation of 1,000 untamed blossoms, a direct link to the buzzing, untamable heart of nature. To taste Mead is to taste a landscape. It is to experience the floral signature of a specific time and place, the delicate perfume of a spring orchard, the robust sweetness of a summer clover field, the smoky, medicinal temps of a purple heather moor. In the medieval world, where the connection to the land was immediate and absolute, this quality was not merely a matter of connoisseurship, it was a matter of identity. The mead of a particular region was a liquid expression of that region's soul, as unique and recognizable as its dialect or its folklore. Its significance, however, transcended mere taste and origin. Mead was a substance woven into the very fabric of myth, a sacred draught that was believed to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. In the mists of northern European lore, in the great cosmic tales of the Norse peoples, mead was not simply a drink of the gods, it was the source of their divine wisdom and creative power. The most potent of these legends is the story of the mead of poetry, the Euchroria, or stirrer of inspiration. This myth, a sprawling epic of creation, murder, and divine theft, begins at the very dawn of time. After the great war between the two tribes of gods, the Gia and the Vanir, to seal their truce, the gods of both sides spat into a single vat, and from this divine saliva, they created a being named Kvasir. Kvasir was the wisest of all beings, so knowledgeable that there was no question he could not answer. He traveled throughout the worlds, sharing his wisdom freely with all who would listen, but his wisdom made him a target. Two treacherous dwarves, Philor and Gelar, lured Kvasir to their underground forge and murdered him. They drained his blood into 3 great vessels, a cauldron named Ukruria, and 2 vats named and Bonand, mixed it with honey. Through this dark and magical fermentation, the blood of the wisest being in existence was transformed into a wondrous mead. Anyone who drank of this mead would become a poet or a scholar, gifted with the power of inspired speech, creative insight, and profound knowledge. The dwarves, however, kept this treasure for themselves. Their greed led to their downfall. After murdering a giant named Gilling and his wife, they were forced to offer the 3 vessels of mead to Gilling's enraged son, the giant Suttinger, as a blood price. Suttinger, recognizing the mead's immense power, hid it deep within a mountain named Hintbjörg, and set his own daughter, the giantess Gunla, to guard it day and night. There the mead of poetry remained, locked away from the worlds, its creative power silenced. But news of this wondrous mead eventually reached Odin, the Allfather, the relentless seeker of wisdom. Odin, disguised as a wandering farmhand, journeyed to the lands of the giants, determined to claim the mead for himself and for the gods. Through a series of cunning tricks and deceptions, he managed to reach the chamber where Gunla guarded the 3 vessels. He seduced the giantess, promising her 3 nights of love in exchange for 3 sips of the mead. Gunla, enamored by the god, agreed. But Odin's thirst was not so easily quenched. With his first sip, he drained the entire cauldron of Ukruria. With his second, he emptied the vat of bone, and with his third, he finished the vat after he had consumed every last drop of the sacred mead. Transforming himself into an eagle, Odin burst from the mountain and flew with all his might towards Asgard, the home of the gods. Satanga, discovering the theft, also took the form of an eagle and gave chase. The flight was desperate, a cosmic race across the heavens. As Odin reached the walls of Asgard, the other gods, seeing his plight, set out vats to catch the precious mead. Odin regurgitated the contents of his stomach into the vats, successfully delivering the mead of poetry to the gods. However, in his haste, and under pressure from the pursuing giant, a few drops of the mead fell from his beak and spattered down upon Midgard, the world of men. These few scattered drops became the portion of humanity. It was from this divine accident, the legend says, that all the bad and mediocre poets of the world received their meager inspiration. The true gift, the pure essence, was reserved for the gods and for those few mortals whom Odin himself chose to favor. This epic tale is far more than a simple adventure story. It is a profound meditation on the nature of inspiration. It tells us that creativity, wisdom, and eloquence are not mundane human inventions. They are divine, a form of sacred intoxication, a substance that must be won through sacrifice, cunning, and courage. For the Norse skald, the Anglo-Saxon scop, or the Celtic bard, to drink mead before a performance was not just to calm the nerves or to enjoy a beverage. It was to partake in a ritual, to invoke the spirit of Kvasir, to call upon the favor of Odin, and to hope that a small taste of that divine, poetic power would flow through them. Mead was the fuel of the storyteller, the liquid courage of the truth speaker, and the very soul of the oral tradition that bound their societies together. This mythical resonance was not confined to Scandinavia. Across the Celtic world, in Ireland and Wales, mead held a similar place of honor. Their legends spoke of the otherworld, a magical realm that was often described as a place of eternal feasting, where rivers of mead flowed freely and the cauldron of plenty never ran dry. Mead was the drink of kingship and sovereignty. The act of a noble lady offering a horn of mead to a warrior was a powerful political and social symbol. It was an affirmation of his status, a recognition of his valor, and a binding of his loyalty to the hall. The very name of the legendary Irish warrior queen, Meb of Connaught, is thought to be derived from the same root as the word mead, translating roughly as she who intoxicates, linking her power and sovereignty directly to the intoxicating, almost magical, properties of the drink. This profound cultural significance found its ultimate physical expression in the institution of the mead hall. The Great Hall was the heart of the community in the early medieval period. the central stage upon which the drama of life was played out. It was a place of warmth and light in a cold, dark world. It was a fortress, a council chamber, a court of law, and a home. And at the center of its social and political life was the communal ritualized drinking of mead. Let us try to conjure the image of such a hall, a place like Hero, so vividly described in the epic poem Beowulf. It was a massive timber-framed structure, long and rectangular, with a high gabled roof, thatched with reeds. Inside, the air was thick with the smoke from the long, open hearth that ran down the center of the earthen floor. The smoke, carrying the smells of roasting meat, sweat, wet wool, and beeswax, would curl and eddy in the high, dark rafters before finding its way out through a simple hole in the roof. The walls might be hung with woven tapestries depicting scenes of myth and battle, or with the polished shields and threatening tusks of boars, symbols of the hall's martial prowess. Light from the flickering fire and from simple tallow or beeswax candles would glint off the treasures of the lord, the gold and silver arm rings, the fine glass vessels, and the jewel-hilted swords. Here, on long wooden benches flanking the central fire, the lord and his warband, his thanes or thanes, would gather after a day of hunting or a season of battle. And it was here that the river of Mead would flow. The drinking was not a chaotic, drunken free-for-all. It was a highly structured and deeply significant ceremony. The vessel was often a great drinking horn, the polished and decorated horn of a wild auroch, an animal of immense power and prestige. This single vessel would be passed from hand to hand, a powerful symbol of the shared identity and mutual obligation of the men who drank from it. The ritual would often be initiated by the lady of the hall, the queen or the lord's wife. She was the peace weaver, a figure of immense social importance, and her role as the server of the mead was central to her status. She would carry the great horn first to her lord, then to the most honored guests and the most celebrated warriors, and then down the benches in descending order of rank. To be served by the queen was an honor. The order in which you were served was a public declaration of your worth. The act of accepting the horn, drinking from it, and passing it on was an act of communion, a constant reaffirmation of the bonds of loyalty that held this volatile warrior society together. As the mead began to work its magic, the formal atmosphere would loosen. This was the time for boasting, the beot of the Anglo-Saxons. Warriors would stand and, over the horn of mead, make grand pronouncements of their past deeds and their intentions for future glory. This was not seen as idle bragging, but as the forging of a sacred public vow. A boast made in the mead hall was a promise that had to be fulfilled, or the warrior would face eternal shame. It was here, fueled by the sweet, potent drink, that oaths of allegiance were sworn, that strategies for war were debated, and that the disputes of the community were settled. The mead hall was the engine of the political and military machine, and mead was its essential fuel, and presiding over it all, a figure as important as the lord himself, was the sclop. The sclop was the court poet, the historian, the entertainer, and the keeper of the tribe's collective memory. As the evening wore on, he would rise, take up his harp, and in a powerful, chanting voice, begin to recite the great epics of his people, tales of heroic ancestors, of dragon slayings, of tragic battles, and of the capricious whims of the gods. The mead, having unlocked the hearts of the warriors, now opened their minds to the power of the spoken word. The scop's performance was the cultural and intellectual heart of the hall. He reminded the warriors of who they were, where they came from, and the code of honor they were sworn to uphold. And the highest praise a lord could offer his scop was to ensure his horn was never empty of the sweet mead that was the very source of his inspiration. The hall, the lord, the warrior, and the poet were all bound together by the golden, flowing river of mead. So, how was this legendary beverage, this liquid soul of a culture, actually made? The craft of the mead maker, or the mazer, was one of patience, of sensory knowledge, and of a deep respect for a process that was seen as being as much a work of magic as it was of human skill. The fundamental recipe is deceptively simple: honey and water. But within that simplicity lies a world of infinite complexity and variation. The process began with the two primary ingredients, and the quality of each was of paramount importance. The soul of the mead was, of course, the honey. The mead maker understood that not all honey was created equal. Just as a winemaker understands the character of different grape varietals, the mazer knew the character of different honeys. The choice of honey was the single most important decision he would make, as it would define the fundamental flavor and aroma profile of the finished product. A mead made from light, delicate clover or acacia honey would be vastly different from one made from dark, robust buckwheat or heather honey. The former would be floral and sweet, the latter earthy, medicinal, and powerful. Monastic mead makers, with their carefully tended gardens, might produce a mead with complex herbal notes from thyme and lavender. A forest beekeeper's honey would yield a mead with the resinous, woody taste of pine and linden blossoms. The skilled mazer would often blend different honeys to achieve a desired complexity. Just as a master blender of whiskey combines spirits from different casks, the honey was the mead's terroir, its undeniable link to a specific patch of earth. The second ingredient, the body of the mead, was water. This was not a trivial component. The medieval world was acutely aware of the quality of its water sources. The ideal water for mead making was soft water, low in minerals, drawn from a clean, fast-flowing stream or a deep, pure well. Water with a high mineral content could inhibit the fermentation process and impart undesirable flavors to the finished mead. The mazer would go to great lengths to secure a source of good water, knowing that it was the blank canvas upon which the vibrant colors of the honey would be painted. The next step was to combine these two ingredients in a large brewing vessel, typically a massive wooden vat or cauldron. The ratio of honey to water would determine the final character of the mead. A higher proportion of honey would result in a sweeter, stronger, and more viscous mead, a sack mead, that would take longer to ferment and age. A lower proportion would produce a lighter, drier, and less alcoholic hydromel, a more common, everyday drink. The mixture of honey and water, known as the must, might be heated gently. This served several purposes. It helped the honey dissolve completely in the water, and it helped to sanitize the must, killing any wild bacteria or undesirable microorganisms that might later spoil the mead. Then came the most mysterious and magical part of the process: fermentation. The medieval mead maker had no knowledge of microbiology, no understanding of the single-celled fungi we call yeast. To him, fermentation was a spontaneous miracle, a divine gift. He knew that if he left the sweet must in a warm place, it would, as if by magic, begin to bubble and froth. The sweetness would lessen, a pleasant warmth would develop, and the liquid would be transformed. He saw this as the work of God, or perhaps of benevolent local spirits. In truth, he was relying on the wild yeasts present in the air, on the surface of the honey, and, most importantly, living in the very pores of his wooden brewing vat. An old, well-used mead vat was a prized possession, as it was colonized by a healthy and reliable culture of yeast, a secret ingredient that the maker would jealously guard. He might refer to this invisible power as the goddess good, a testament to his belief in its divine origin. The fermentation could be a slow and temperamental process, lasting for weeks or even months. The mazer would watch over his bubbling vats with the attentiveness of a nursemaid, keeping them warm and protected. He would listen to the hissing and bubbling, judging the vigor of the fermentation by its sound. He would taste the transforming liquid, noting the slow decline in sweetness and the gradual rise of the complex flavors he sought. After the primary fermentation subsided, the mead would be racked, or siphoned, off the thick layer of dead yeast and sediment, known as the lees, that had settled at the bottom of the vat. This young, or green, mead would then be transferred to wooden barrels for a long period of aging. This was the final, crucial stage, the test of the mead maker's patience. Aging, which could last from several months to several years for the finest meads, was when the magic truly happened. The harsh, raw flavors of the young mead would mellow and soften. The disparate notes of honey, water, and alcohol would marry and meld, creating a smooth, harmonious, and complex tapestry of flavor. The finest aged meads, served at the high table of a king, were liquids of incredible nuance and power, as complex and rewarding as any modern vintage wine. The simple canvas of honey and water also invited a world of creative variation, giving rise to a whole family of related beverages. The addition of herbs and spices to the fermenting must create a category of mead, known as metheglin. The name itself derives from the Welsh medeglin, meaning medicinal liquor, and this points to its origin. Metheglins were often created not just for their flavor, but for their perceived therapeutic properties. Monasteries, with their extensive herb gardens, were masters of the metheglin. A mazer might add meadowsweet for its anti-inflammatory properties, hawthorn for the heart, or chamomile to aid sleep. Other spices, brought at great expense along the winding trade routes from the east, were used to create exotic and luxurious flavor profiles. Cloves, nutmeg, ginger, cinnamon, and grains of paradise could all find their way into the brewing vat, creating warm, spiced meads that were especially popular during the cold winter months, particularly around the Yule festival. A well-made metheglin was a complex and aromatic beverage, a masterful balancing act between the sweetness of the honey and the bitter, spicy, or floral notes of the added when fruit was added to the must. The resulting beverage was known as a malomal. This was a way of preserving the fleeting flavors of summer and autumn fruits long into the winter. Virtually any fruit could be used. Blackberries, raspberries, and elderberries would create deep, dark, richly colored malamals with a pleasant tartness that cut through the honey's sweetness. Cherries, plums, and damsons would lend their stone fruit character. The possibilities were limited only by the local harvest and the maize's imagination. A special category of melomel made with apple juice was known as a cicer, while one made with pear juice was a perimead. These were particularly popular in regions like England and Normandy, where apples and pears were abundant. The cicer, combining the floral notes of honey with the crisp, acidic bite of the apple, was a particularly refreshing and beloved drink. Finally, there was the hearty and nourishing hybrid known as braggot. This was a potent brew that combined the characteristics of both mead and ale. It was made by fermenting honey and malted grain, usually barley or oats, together, or by blending finished mead with finished ale. The result was a drink that had the sweetness and aroma of mead, combined with the malty, bready body of beer. Braggot was often thicker, darker, and more nutritious than mead alone, and it was a popular and fortifying drink, especially among the common folk, who appreciated its dual nature as both an intoxicant and a source of calories. It was the perfect synthesis of the two great northern brewing traditions. This entire family of honey-based drinks played a central role not just in the great halls, but in the everyday rituals and milestones of medieval life. Mead was the drink of celebration, of rites of passage. At a wedding, it was the ceremonial drink that sealed the union. The tradition of providing a newly married couple with a month's supply of mead, to be consumed during the first moon of their marriage, was believed to ensure a happy, fruitful, and fertile union. This custom is the direct origin of our modern term honeymoon, a poignant echo of a time when the sweetness of honey was thought to bestow blessings upon a new life together. Mead would be served at christenings to celebrate new life, and at funerals to honor the dead and comfort the living. It was the centerpiece of the great seasonal festivals that marked the turning of the year, the raucous feasting of Yule, the joyous celebrations of May Day, and the grateful festivities of the harvest home. To share mead was to share in the life of the community, to partake in its joys, its sorrows, and its sacred traditions. For centuries, mead reigned supreme as the celebratory drink of choice, particularly in the northern half of Europe. But the world does not stand still, and the tastes and economies of a continent were destined to change. The decline of mead's dominance was not a sudden event, but a slow, gradual erosion, a fading hum in the cultural chorus, caused by the rise of powerful competitors. The first and most significant rival was beer. While mead was the drink of feasts and heroes, beer, or more accurately, ale, was the daily bread of the common person. It was cheaper, quicker, and easier to produce. Grain was more plentiful and less expensive than honey. The brewing process for a simple ale took a fraction of the time required for a mead to ferment and age properly. Ale was not just a drink. It was a food source, a thick, nutritious liquid bread that provided a significant portion of the daily caloric intake for the peasantry and laboring classes. As populations grew and agricultural practices improved, the dominance of grain-based economies solidified, and the production of ale soared, pushing mead into a more specialized, high-status niche. From the south, another competitor advanced, wine. In the lands of the former Roman Empire, the culture of the grapevine had never faltered. Wine was central to the Roman identity, and this cultural prestige was inherited and amplified by the Catholic Church. Wine was the sacred beverage of the Eucharist, the blood of Christ. As the Church's power and influence spread northward, so too did its preference for wine. Monasteries in France, Germany, and even England began to cultivate vineyards with great success. Wine became a powerful symbol of status, sophistication, and piety. To serve fine French wine at your table was a mark of immense wealth and continental taste. a way for a northern lord to display his connection to the more civilized world of the south. Compared to the refined and complex culture of viticulture, the ancient craft of mead making began to seem rustic, even pagan. The final blow to the age of honey, and thus to the age of mead, came with the dawn of the modern era and the rise of a new, powerful, and ruthlessly efficient form of sweetness: sugar. The establishment of vast sugarcane plantations in the It is tempting to view the world we have explored as a lost continent, a realm of history so utterly different from our own that it exists only as a quaint and distant curiosity, sealed off from us by the insurmountable walls of time. The great timber-bird mead halls have long since crumbled to dust. The Zeidler no longer climbs the ancient oaks of the primeval forests. The straw skep, once the ubiquitous home of the bee, now sits as a museum piece, a rustic artifact from a bygone age. The overwhelming dominance of honey has been so completely usurped by the global empire of sugar that its former reign is almost impossible to imagine. The golden age, it would seem, is well and truly over, its light extinguished, its stories silenced. But this is a profound misconception. The past is never truly past. It does not vanish, it transforms, it does not die. It embeds itself in the deepest layers of our culture, our language, our science, and even our biology, continuing to shape our present and our future in ways we seldom recognize. The golden age of honey did not end. It merely dissolved, its constituent elements seeping into the very foundations of the world we inhabit today. Its echoes are all around us, not as loud, declarative shouts, but as persistent, resonant whispers. They can be heard in the words we speak, seen in the symbols we revere, tasted in the foods we cherish, and felt in the ecological challenges we now face. To conclude our journey, we must now learn to listen for these echoes. We must train our modern ears to hear the faint, insistent hum of the medieval past in the roaring machine of the present. This is the story of that survival, the chronicle of the enduring legacy of the bee and its sweet, golden treasure. The most pervasive and perhaps most profound echo of the medieval world's relationship with the bee is found not in a physical substance, but in the realm of pure symbol. To the medieval mind, as we have explored, the bee was a living parable, a creature that embodied a host of virtues that society held most dear. Its tireless industry was a model for the diligent peasant and the devoted monk. Its fiercely loyal monarchical society was a mirror of the ideal feudal kingdom. Its perceived chastity was a sacred reflection of Christian purity. The bee was a sermon in miniature, a constant, buzzing reminder of the divine order. This powerful symbolic legacy did not vanish with the end of the Middle Ages. It proved to be remarkably adaptable, shedding its overtly religious connotations, while retaining its core message of productive, ordered, and communal effort. Consider the political and social philosophy that emerged in the centuries following the medieval period. Thinkers of the Enlightenment, obsessed with creating the perfect model of human society, repeatedly returned to the metaphor of the beehive. The hive was a natural commonwealth, a self-regulating system where each individual worked not for personal gain, but for the good of the whole. This image of selfless, coordinated labor for a common purpose became a powerful symbol for political theorists, social reformers, and revolutionaries. The beehive was used as a model for everything from the ideal factory to the utopian socialist commune. The bee, once a symbol of feudal loyalty to a divinely appointed king, was recast as the perfect citizen of an industrious republic. This potent symbolism found a new and powerful expression in the burgeoning world of Freemasonry. In Masonic lore, the beehive is one of the most important emblems, a key symbol taught to the Master Mason. Here, it represents the virtues of industry and cooperation, reminding Masons that they should be productive members of society, working together for the betterment of humanity. The beehive in a Masonic lodge is a direct descendant of the medieval perception of the hive as a perfect, harmonious society. It is a symbol of order, of structure, and of the sweet rewards that come from collective, virtuous labor. The Masons, great synthesizers of ancient symbols, recognized the timeless power of the bee and enshrined it at the heart of their moral and philosophical teachings. This symbolic power has also been harnessed by the state. The most famous example is the state of Utah in the United States, which proudly calls itself the Beehive State. This designation, chosen by the Mormon pioneers who settled the remote desert territory in the 19th century, was a deliberate and conscious invocation of the bee's symbolic heritage. For these settlers, who sought to build a new Zion, a cooperative commonwealth in the wilderness, the beehive was the perfect emblem of their social and religious ideals. It symbolized industry, thrift, perseverance, and the creation of a harmonious community through shared faith and hard work. The beehive on the Utah state flag and state seal is not merely a decorative element, it is a foundational statement of identity, a direct echo of a symbolic tradition that stretches back through the ages to the monasteries and manors of medieval Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte, too, in his quest to establish a new French empire, chose the bee as one of his most personal and important symbols, seeing it as a representation of ancient French sovereignty and tireless industry, a potent alternative to the fleur-de-lis of the monarchy he had overthrown. This symbolic resonance continues to thrive in the modern corporate world. Countless businesses, from financial institutions to software companies, have incorporated bees or beehive-related imagery into their logos and branding. The reasons are clear. The bee symbolizes productivity, efficiency, communication, and teamwork. The hive represents a well-organized structure, a place of safety and accumulated wealth. In our hyper-capitalist age, the bee has been transformed once more, from a symbol of religious piety and civic virtue into the ultimate icon of corporate productivity. Yet, even in this secular, commercial context, the fundamental medieval admiration for the bee's industrious and communal nature shines through. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the bee's symbolic journey is the story of its leadership. For well over 2 millennia, from the time of Aristotle to the era of Shakespeare, the ruler of the beehive was universally believed to be a king bee. This was a classic case of anthropomorphic projection. Human societies were ruled by kings, so it was only logical that this perfect miniature kingdom was also ruled by a male monarch. The larger, more regal-looking bee at the heart of the colony, the one who laid all the eggs, was naturally assumed to be the king, commanding his loyal subjects. This view reinforced the patriarchal social structures of the time. In Shakespeare's Henry V, the Archbishop of Canterbury delivers a famous speech comparing the English kingdom to a beehive, detailing how the emperor bee oversees his soldier bees, his merchant bees, and his laboring bees, a perfect model of a well-ordered state under a powerful male ruler. It was not until the Dutch scientist Jan Swammerdam, in the 17th century, placed a hive under his microscope and performed a series of meticulous dissections that the truth was finally revealed. The ruler of the hive was not a king, but a queen, a female who was the mother of nearly every other bee in the colony. This discovery was a scientific revolution in miniature, a profound and startling revelation that overturned centuries of accepted wisdom. It demonstrated the power of the new scientific method of direct observation over the ancient tradition of philosophical analogy. Yet, the old symbol was so powerful that the discovery took a long time to be widely accepted. The transition from a king bee to a queen bee was not just a biological correction, it was a cultural and symbolic shift, a small but significant crack in the patriarchal worldview that had defined the medieval and early modern periods. The bee, once a symbol that reinforced human social structures, now became a creature whose reality challenged them. In a way, the modern scientific understanding of the queen bee and her complex, pheromone-driven influence over the colony is even more wondrous and awe-inspiring than the old, simplistic myth of the king bee. The echo of the medieval symbol has been replaced by the roar of scientific truth, and the reality is all the more remarkable for it. If the symbolism of the bee is the most pervasive echo of the Golden Age, the most tangible is surely the taste of honey itself. Yet, its position in our culinary world is a shadow of its former glory, a direct consequence of one of the most significant and disruptive events in the history of food, the sugar revolution. To understand the world we inhabit, we must understand the profound and permanent shift that occurred when sugar, once an exotic and fabulously expensive spice, became a cheap, ubiquitous, and industrial commodity. This transformation, fueled by the brutal economics of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, fundamentally rewired the human palate. The establishment of vast sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas, worked by millions of enslaved Africans, unleashed a tidal wave of sucrose upon the world. For the first time in human history, intense, unadulterated sweetness was available to the masses. This new sweetness was different. Honey's sweetness is complex, a rich tapestry of flavors derived from the nectar of countless flowers. It contains fructose and glucose, but also trace amounts of acids, enzymes, minerals, and volatile aromatic compounds. Its sweetness is buffered, nuanced, and lingering. Industrial sugar, or sucrose, is a chemical isolate. Its sweetness is a pure, monolithic, and brutally efficient sledgehammer. It provides a quick, intense, and highly addictive neurochemical reward, with none of honey's subtlety. As cheap sugar flooded the market, it began to displace honey in kitchens across the Western world. It was easier to store, easier to measure, and, most importantly, it delivered a more potent and reliable sweet hit. The human palate, in the span of just a few generations, was retrained. We became a civilization of sugar addicts, and our collective taste memory of a world defined by the complex sweetness of honey began to fade. For several centuries, honey was relegated to a secondary role, a quaint, old-fashioned sweetener, something to be used in specific traditional recipes or perhaps as a home remedy for a sore throat. It was seen as a rustic, nostalgic product, not a primary culinary staple. But in recent decades, we have witnessed a remarkable and heartening counter-revolution, a quiet but determined resurgence of interest in honey, driven by a growing desire for authenticity, complexity, and a deeper connection to our food. This modern honey renaissance is, in many ways, a direct echo of the medieval appreciation for the substance. The artisanal food movement, with its emphasis on locality, seasonality, and terroir, has found its perfect expression in honey. We are rediscovering what the medieval beekeeper always knew, that not all honey is the same. The generic, blended honey sold in plastic squeeze bears on supermarket shelves is a pale imitation of the real thing. Today, discerning consumers and chefs are seeking out single origin, raw, and unfiltered honeys, each one a unique liquid snapshot of a specific landscape. We now speak of Manuka honey from New Zealand, prized for its potent medicinal properties, much as a medieval apothecary might have prized the honey from a specific monastic herb garden. We seek out the light, delicate orange blossom honey from Florida or California, the dark, molasses-like, buckwheat honey from the northern plains, the complex, almost savory flavor of chestnut honey from Italy, or the resinous, aromatic pine honey from Greece. This modern connoisseurship, this celebration of honey's infinite variety, is a powerful echo of a time when the honey from the local heath or the Lord's own orchard was a source of regional pride and distinct identity. The concept of terroir, so often associated with wine, is being reapplied to honey, and in doing so, we are reconnecting with a much older, more fundamental understanding of its nature. In the modern gourmet kitchen, honey is also being rediscovered, not just as a sweetener, but as a complex flavor agent in its own right. Chefs are using it in savory applications, sin glazes for roasted meats, in vinaigrettes for salads, in marinades for vegetables, harnessing its ability to balance acidity, add depth, and create a beautiful caramelization. This, too, echoes the medieval culinary tradition, where honey was often used in savory dishes, its sweetness playing a crucial role in the complex flavor-balancing act of medieval cuisine, which often featured a blend of sweet, sour, and spiced elements. Furthermore, in an age of growing concern about processed foods and industrial sweeteners like high-fructose corn syrup, honey is experiencing a resurgence as a natural and healthier alternative. While it is still a sugar and should be consumed in moderation, its natural composition of enzymes, antioxidants, and trace nutrients gives it a health halo that refined sugar lacks. This perception of honey as a wholesome, pure, and life-giving substance is perhaps the most direct and unbroken link to the medieval worldview, a timeless intuition that the product of the bee is inherently more than just its sweetness. The second great treasure of the hive, beeswax, has undergone a similar journey from ubiquitous necessity to cherished niche product. In the medieval world, the value of beeswax was, at times, even greater than that of honey. Its primary and most vital role was as the fuel for the finest form of artificial light. In a world plunged into profound darkness after sunset, the quality of one's light was a direct measure of one's wealth and status. The vast majority of medieval people lived by the light of the fire, or, if they could afford it, the dim, sputtering, foul-smelling light of the tallow candle. Tallow, made from rendered animal fat, was the cheap and common option, but it was a poor substitute for the luxury of wax. Tallow candles produced a greasy, black smoke that coated walls and ceilings with soot, and they gave off a nauseating odor of burning fat. To read, to sew, or to simply exist in the presence of a tallow candle was an unpleasant and eye-straining experience. The beeswax candle was the complete opposite. It burned with a clean, bright, steady flame that was far more luminous than that of tallow. It produced almost no smoke, and instead of a foul odor, it released the subtle, sweet, and comforting scent of honey. It was, in every respect, a superior source of light. This superiority made it incredibly expensive, a luxury reserved for the nobility, the wealthy merchant class, and, most importantly, the church. The Catholic Church was the single greatest consumer of beeswax in the Middle Ages. The theology of the Mass demanded a pure and sacred light, a physical representation of the divine light of Christ. Tallow was considered too base, too connected to the slaughter of animals, to be burned upon the holy altar. Beeswax, produced by the virgin bees, was deemed the only substance pure enough for this sacred duty. Papal decrees and local synods throughout the Middle Ages mandated that the candles used in liturgical services, especially the great Paschal candle lit at Easter, be made of pure beeswax. The demand was insatiable. Monasteries, as we have seen, became centers of beeswax production, their vast apiaries existing as much to fuel the light of the altar as to sweeten the food in the refectory. The flickering light of 1,000 beeswax candles in a great Gothic cathedral was a sight of almost unimaginable beauty and expense, a testament to the immense spiritual and economic power of the Church, and a direct product of the labor of millions upon millions of bees. The reign of the beeswax candle, as the ultimate source of light, was long, but it was not eternal. The relentless march of technology slowly but surely rendered it obsolete. The discovery and exploitation of whale oil in the 18th and 19th centuries provided a brighter, cheaper alternative. This was soon followed by the development of gaslight, which illuminated the streets and homes of the new industrial cities. And finally, the invention of the incandescent light bulb by Thomas Edison in the late 19th century delivered the final, decisive blow. The practical necessity of the beeswax candle was extinguished forever by the clean, constant, and almost magical glow of electricity. Yet, the beeswax candle did not disappear. Like honey, it retreated from the realm of necessity into the realm of luxury and special significance. Today, the beeswax candle is a high-end, artisanal product, prized for the very same qualities that made it so valuable in the Middle Ages. We still cherish its clean, smokeless burn, its long-lasting flame, and its beautiful, natural, honeyed scent. It has become a staple of the aromatherapy and wellness markets, a symbol of natural living and a way to create a calm, soothing atmosphere. When we choose to light a pure beeswax candle in our homes today, we are participating in a ritual that stretches back for centuries, seeking the same clean, beautiful light that once illuminated the high altars and noble halls of the medieval world. The Catholic Church, in a powerful display of tradition, still requires that its liturgical candles contain at least some percentage of beeswax, a quiet but unbroken thread of continuity connecting the modern Mass to its ancient origins. The echoes of beeswax are found in other modern niches as well. Its use in high-quality cosmetics, particularly lip balms, hand salves and lotions, is a direct continuation of its role in medieval medicine, where it formed the base for countless ointments and unguents. Its protective and emollient properties are as valued now as they were then. The recent rise in popularity of reusable beeswax food wraps is a fascinating modern reinvention of an ancient practice. For centuries, beeswax was used to create waterproof seals for food containers and to provide a protective coating for cheeses and preserved meats. The modern beeswax wrap, marketed as an eco-friendly alternative to plastic wrap, is simply a new application of this ancient, sustainable technology. From the sacred to the mundane, from the light on the altar to the wrap on our sandwich, the quiet, versatile legacy of beeswax endures. Of all the products of the hive, Mead is the one that experienced the most dramatic fall from grace and is now undergoing the most spectacular and unlikely revival. As we have seen, Mead, the drink of gods and heroes, was slowly but surely pushed to the cultural margins by the inexorable rise of beer and wine and the economic collapse of the honey-based economy. For centuries, it became a historical curiosity, a folkloric beverage, something one might read about in Beowulf or a fantasy novel, but was unlikely to ever encounter in the real world. It became a drink that was sleeping, a liquid legend waiting for a new generation to reawaken it. That reawakening has happened, and it is one of the most exciting stories in the modern craft beverage movement. The modern mead renaissance began as a whisper in the mid-20th century, primarily within the niche communities of homebrewers and historical reenactment societies. These passionate amateurs, inspired by historical texts and driven by a do-it-yourself ethos, began to experiment with reviving the lost art of the mesa. They rediscovered old recipes, learned the delicate science of yeast and fermentation, and began to produce small batches of mead in their own homes. What began as a hobby has, in the 21st century, exploded into a full-fledged commercial industry. All across North America, Europe, and beyond, small, independent craft meaderies are springing up, bringing a new level of artistry, science, and sophistication to this ancient beverage. The modern mesa is a fascinating hybrid figure. He is part historian, poring over ancient texts for inspiration. He is part scientist, using modern knowledge of microbiology to select specific yeast strains and precisely control fermentation temperatures. And he is part artist, a culinary creator who thinks like a chef or a winemaker, blending flavors and aging his creations to achieve a perfect balance and complexity. This modern revival has reintroduced the world to the incredible diversity of mead, and in doing so, it has reconnected us with the medieval brewing tradition. Modern meaderies are producing traditional meads that showcase the unique character of single varietal honeys. They are crafting complex aromatic metheglins, using a global pantry of herbs and spices that would have been the envy of any medieval king. They are creating vibrant, fruity melomels with everything from traditional berries and cherries to exotic tropical fruits. They are pressing apples to make crisp, refreshing cisers, and they are brewing rich, hearty braggots that bridge the gap between the worlds of mead and beer. The entire medieval family of honey-based drinks has been reborn, and it is more diverse and more delicious than ever before. A significant catalyst for this revival has been the powerful influence of modern fantasy literature, film, and video games. The works of J.R.R. Tolkien, with their loving descriptions of the Golden Hall of Meduseld, introduced generations of readers to the romance of the mead hall. The immense popularity of television series like Game of Thrones and video games like The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, both of which feature mead as a common and celebrated beverage, has brought the drink out of the pages of epic poetry and into the mainstream cultural consciousness. For many people, their first exposure to the idea of mead came from a fantasy world, and this has created a curious and eager market for the real thing. It is a fascinating case of modern mythology, helping to revive an ancient reality. The modern mead maker, with his stainless steel tanks and his scientific instruments, is a world away from the medieval mesa, who relied on wild yeast and the goddess good. Yet, the fundamental spirit of the craft remains the same. It is a craft of patience, of transformation, and of a deep respect for the fundamental goodness of honey. To drink a glass of modern craft mead is to participate in a remarkable act of cultural resurrection. It is to taste a direct, living link to the past, to lift a cup that our distant ancestors would have recognized, and to toast the enduring power of this golden, legendary drink. Beyond the tangible products of the hive, the echoes of the Golden Age are woven into the very fabric of our language and our culture, often in ways we take for granted. Our daily speech is littered with fossilized remnants of the medieval world's intimate relationship with bees and honey, linguistic artifacts that have long outlived their original context. The most poignant of these is the word honeymoon. We use it today to refer to the holiday a couple takes after their wedding, but its origin, as we have seen, lies in the medieval tradition of providing a newly married couple with a month's supply of mead. This honeymoon was believed to promote virility and fertility, ensuring the birth of a healthy heir and a happy future. The modern honeymoon may have swapped the mead for a trip to the beach, but the name remains, a beautiful and enduring linguistic echo of a time when honey was believed to hold the very secret of life and love. We use the phrase to make a beeline for something, to describe moving directly and purposefully towards a goal. This is a direct reference to the remarkable ability of foraging bees to fly in a straight, unerring line back to their hive after finding a source of nectar, a feat of navigation that still astounds scientists. The expression "busy as a bee" is a timeless tribute to the insect's tireless work ethic, an observation as true for the medieval peasant as it is for the modern office worker. When we tell someone to mind their own beeswax, we are using a phrase that likely originated with artisans or housewives who were protective of their valuable and labor-intensive supply of wax. Even the quirky compliment, the bee's knees, thought to have emerged in the 1920s, harks back to the idea of the bee as a creature that carries the most precious of substances, pollen and nectar on its legs. These are more than just quaint expressions. They are evidence of a deeply ingrained cultural consciousness. They show how the characteristics of the bee and the value of its products were so fundamental to our ancestors' worldview that they became the natural go-to metaphors for concepts like purpose, industry, value, and excellence. Beyond language, the echoes persist in our folklore. The ancient tradition of telling the bees, the practice of informing the hives of major family events, persisted in rural parts of Europe and North America well into the 20th century. This wasn't just a children's story. It was a deeply felt folk belief, a remnant of a pre-Christian, animistic worldview in which the bees were seen as spiritual intermediaries, liminal beings with a connection to the other world. The survival of this tradition for so long, even in a world that had supposedly been rationalized by science and Christianity, speaks to the profound and enduring power of the mystical bond that humans have felt with these creatures. Even our legal systems carry faint echoes. Modern laws in many places regarding the ownership of swarms which often state that a beekeeper has the right to pursue and claim a swarm as long as he keeps it in sight are direct descendants of the ancient customary laws that governed beekeeping in the medieval period. These laws reflect a time when a swarm was a valuable, free-floating resource, and clear rules were needed to prevent disputes between neighbors. The legal ghost of the medieval beekeeper, chasing his swarm across the fields with his tanging pots, can still be found in the dry, technical language of modern property law. We come now to the final and most urgent echo of the Golden Age, an echo that is not a gentle whisper from the past, but a loud, clanging alarm bell in the present. It concerns the keeper and the kept, and a profound crisis that threatens to sever their ancient bond forever. The modern beekeeper is a figure of fascinating contrasts. In many ways, he is the direct heir of his medieval predecessor, a practitioner of a timeless craft. He still needs an intimate knowledge of the seasons, of the local flora, and of the intricate biology of the bee. He must still be patient, gentle, and courageous. Yet, he is also a product of a profound technological revolution, the single greatest innovation in the history of beekeeping, the invention of the Langstroth hive in the mid-19th century. This hive, with its movable frames and its precisely calculated bee space, changed everything. For the first time, the beekeeper could open the hive, inspect the colony, manage its health, and, most importantly, harvest the honey without destroying the comb or the colony. The Langstroth hive broke the brutal, destructive cycle of the skep and the sulfur pit. It transformed beekeeping from a practice of periodic sacrifice into one of sustainable husbandry. It allowed for the development of a modern, large-scale honey industry and made the life of the beekeeper infinitely more productive and less fraught with moral compromise. Yet, despite this incredible technological leap forward, the modern beekeeper and his bees are facing a set of threats that are far more insidious and far more dangerous than anything the medieval keeper could have imagined. The medieval keeper worried about a bad winter, a hungry badger, or a localized disease. The modern keeper is on the front line of a global ecological crisis. He faces the mysterious and devastating phenomenon of colony collapse disorder, CCD, where entire colonies of bees simply vanish from their hives. He battles the relentless scourge of the Varroa destructor mite, a parasitic vampire that weakens colonies and transmits deadly viruses. He confronts the pervasive and invisible threat of modern pesticides, particularly the class of neurotoxins known as neonicotinoids, which are used on a massive scale in industrial agriculture and have been shown to impair the bee's ability to navigate, forage, and resist disease. And he witnesses the relentless destruction of the very landscape that sustains the bees, the loss of wildflower meadows, hedgerows, and diverse habitats, replaced by vast, sterile monocultures that create food deserts for pollinators. This modern crisis has revealed a profound and terrifying truth, a truth that the medieval world understood intuitively, but that we, in our hubris, have forgotten. Our relationship with the bee is not a one-way street. We do not simply take their honey and wax as a luxury. We are fundamentally, existentially dependent on them for our own survival. The greatest service the bee provides is not the production of honey, but the act of pollination. Roughly 1/3 of the food we eat, including a vast array of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, depends directly on the pollination services of bees and other insects. The bee, which in the medieval world was primarily a provider of sweetness and light, has, in the modern world, been revealed as a keystone species, a tiny, fragile linchpin holding up the entire edifice of our agricultural system. The quiet hum of the bee in a meadow is not just a pleasant sound, it is the sound of our food system functioning. The threats facing the bee are therefore not just an ecological curiosity, they are a direct and immediate threat to human food security. The crisis of the bee is our crisis, and so, we find ourselves at the end of our journey, having come full circle. We began by exploring a world that revered the bee for its gifts of sweetness and light. We end in a world that is being forced, by a crisis of our own making, to rediscover a new kind of reverence for the bee, a reverence based not on myth and superstition, but on the stark, scientific reality of ecological interdependence. The echo of the Golden Age has become a call to action. The responsibility of the keeper has now expanded beyond the confines of the apiary. We must all, in our own way, become keepers. We must become keepers of the environment that sustains these vital creatures. This is the ultimate lesson that the long golden history of the bee has to teach us. Therefore, we invite you, as our journey concludes, to take this story out into the world. Reconnect with the ancient legacy of the hive. Seek out your local beekeepers, buy their honey, taste their mead, and learn about their craft. In doing so, you are not just a consumer, you are a patron of a timeless tradition. Plant a pollinator-friendly garden, even if it is just a single pot on a windowsill. Fill it with lavender, borage, thyme, and clover. Avoid the use of pesticides. Allow a small patch of your lawn to grow wild, and let the dandelions bloom. They are a vital early food source for hungry bees. Educate yourself and others about the critical importance of pollinators and the threats they face. Advocate for agricultural policies that support biodiversity and reduce our reliance on harmful chemicals. In these small, individual acts, a new kind of collective stewardship is born. The medieval world looked to the bee as a model for the ideal society. Perhaps it is time for us to do so again, to learn from their selfless cooperative work, and to understand that the health of the individual is inseparable from the health of the whole colony. The hum of the bee is one of the oldest and most comforting sounds on our planet. It is the sound of summer, of life, of sweetness. It is a profound and beautiful echo of the past. It is now our sacred duty to ensure that this hum does not fade into silence, but continues to resonate, strong and clear, for all the generations yet to come. Our survival, in ways our ancestors could have only understood through myth, truly depends on it. The sweet gold of the Middle Ages has not vanished. It has simply become quieter. It is a reminder of a time when the sweetness of life was intimately connected to the earth, to the seasons, and to the diligent, mysterious work of the honeybee. So now, as our story comes to a close, let the warmth of the fire and the memory of this golden age lull you into a peaceful rest. Let your thoughts drift back to a time of castles and monasteries and the gentle, tireless buzzing of bees in a sun-drenched medieval garden.